So I'm really happy to have all of you here. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Tracye Matthews, who is a historian, curator, and documentary filmmaker. She's currently the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture at the University of Chicago, where she served as a Mellon Postdoctoral Teaching Fellow in 2004-2005. Matthews was the media curator for the Teen Chicago Project at the Chicago Historical Society, CHS, now Chicago History Museum. In 2003, she curated Harold Washington, The Man and the Movement, a major exhibition at CHS commemorating the 20th anniversary of the election of Chicago's first Black mayor. Dr. Matthews previously served as a public historian and project coordinator of Neighborhoods, Keepers of Culture, and also at the Chicago Historical Society. Matthews was previously an assistant professor in the African Studies Department at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Her work has been published in numerous anthologies and journals, including Race and Class. She is currently writing a book on gender and sexual politics of the Black Panther Party. Ms. Matthews earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and master's and doctorate in American history from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Ms. Taylor and her team and Dr. Carol Adams for inviting me to participate in this discussion today. And I'm so honored to be a part of this amazing group of panelists. And I think they're the perfect combination of folks to talk about the topics that are laid out in the play that Ms. Taylor has laid out for us today. I'm going to begin by introducing each of the panelists, and then I'm going to sit down and join them to get the conversation going. First, I'd like to introduce Corey Mason, who's at the very end. Corey is a 22-year-old recent graduate of Philander Smith College. He's originally from the Woodlawn community, and his self-development and social justice work is centered on demanding equity for groups that are marginalized because of political, economic, racial, and religious oppression. Mason is co-founder of a youth-led peer education organization called Fearless Leading by the Youth, also known as FLY, located in the Woodlawn neighborhood. FLY's vision is to see youth being the vanguards of social change by working in collaborative, organized effort to improve the conditions in their community. FLY's two main campaigns are the Trauma Center campaign and the Audie Home campaign. The Trauma Center campaign focuses on the lack of a trauma center on the south side of Chicago, and the Audie Home campaign deals with the unsanitary and inhumane conditions endured by youth within the Juvenile Detention Center in Chicago. Next, who's not next to him, but next on my list is Charlene Carruthers. Hold up your hand, Charlene, so everybody knows who you are. Charlene is the National Director of the Black Youth Project 100, which is an activist member-led organization of Black 18 to 35-year-olds dedicated to creating justice and freedom for all Black people. She's a political organizer and writer with over 10 years' experience in racial justice, feminist, and youth leadership development movement work. Her passion for developing young leaders to build capacity within marginalized communities has led her to work on immigrant rights, economic justice, and civil rights campaigns nationwide. She's led grassroots and digital strategy campaigns for national progressive organizations, including the Center for Community Change, the Women's Media Center, colorofchange.org, and National People's Action.
Woo woo! BYP 100!
Charlene earned her BA in History and International Studies from Illinois Wesleyan University and a Master's of Social Work from Washington University in St. Louis, and she's born and raised on the south side of Chicago, where she currently resides. Reverend Vance Henry is one of our other panelists. And I think I probably have an outdated bio for you. I was just passed your card, which says that you're currently the Deputy Chief of Staff, community and faith-based initiatives in the office of the mayor. So that's his current position. Previously, he served as the director of the City of Chicago's CAPS implementation office, and he was also previously the public outreach coordinator for the CAPS implementation office. He's acted as the 24th Ward Alderman Michael Chandler's chief of staff, and he has an extensive background in grassroots community organizing and served as assistant pastor and program director for the Lawndale Community Church. He's also a former executive director of the Interfaith Organizing Project of Greater Chicago and serves on the board of directors for several community-based organizations. Born and raised on the west side of Chicago in North Lawndale, he's a product of the Chicago public school system. He graduated from Wheaton College with a special dual degree in philosophy and sociology and has done graduate work at the Garrett Theological Seminary at Northwestern University. He's an ordained Baptist minister who's been preaching since 1986, and he presently serves as assistant pastor of social justice and civic affairs for the First Baptist Congregational Church. Next, I'm going to introduce Robert Blackwell Sr. Can you hold your hand up so we'll all know who you are? For those who don't know. Business consultant Robert D. Blackwell was born July 28, 1937 in Eastville, Virginia. Blackwell graduated from Radnor High School and went on to Wichita State University on an athletic scholarship where he played football until an injury prevented him from going further in that career path. He graduated with a BA in psychology in 1966. Also in 1966, Mr. Blackwell went to work for IBM while the business computer industry was in its infancy. After serving as IBM's highest-ranking black executive, Blackwell left IBM in 1992 to form Blackwell Consulting with his son, Robert Blackwell Jr., and they grew that company to become one of the largest and most successful minority-owned IT companies in the country. Mr. Blackwell is a board member of the ETA Creative Arts Foundation, and he currently serves as the interim CEO and director of the DuSable Museum of African American History. Melody Span Cooper. Is the president and general manager of Chicago's WVON AM. She heads, and as such, she heads the only African-American owned radio station in the nation's third largest market. She's the first black woman in Chicago to hold this distinction. In 1999, Span Cooper purchased a controlling interest in the Midway Broadcasting Company, the parent company of WVON, and was named chairman of the board. Span Cooper was educated in Chicago Catholic institutions from elementary school through Loyola University, where she earned her BA in criminal justice. But Span Cooper's education in radio began closer to home on the knee of her father, legendary Chicago disc jockey Purvis Span, known in radio as the blues man. Correct. With her father as mentor, Span Cooper began working at WVON at age 15 and earning a full-time job as an on-air radio personality in 1980. In 1986, Span Cooper was named news director, and in 1994, she became president and general manager, a position she still holds in addition to chairman of the board and station owner. And last but certainly not least, Desiree Rogers. Desiree was appointed CEO of Johnson Publishing Company in August of 2010. Rogers has known Johnson Publishing for over 20 years through personal relationships with the Johnson family and comes to the position with an extensive track record in brand rebuilding. Most recently, Rogers served as the White House Social Secretary for President Obama, where she spearheaded the establishment of the White House as the People's House and managed over 350 events. In addition, she has extensive corporate experience and a network of relationships built over 25 years. Rogers has a BA degree in political science from Wellesley College and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Testing? Okay, great. So, as I said, I think this is an amazing group of panelists, but also a perfect combination of people to talk about the issues that Ms. Taylor has laid out for us today. And so when I saw who was going to be on the panel, and Dr. Adams asked me to be on the panel, I said, okay, let me think about what do these people have in common and why does it make sense for them to be in conversation with one another. And what I came up with is that all of them represent entities which are shaping the current and future direction and fate of the Black community through their representations of Blackness, their activism, their cultural production, their challenges to mainstream media depictions and political spin, and they are constantly evolving our idea about what it means to be Black and to be seekers of justice and freedom in this millennium.
Woo!
Ms. Taylor's play is about Black institutions, and I think Black institutions is one of the themes we're going to talk about today, as each of these panelists are representatives of some very important and iconic institutions in our communities. The play is asking us questions about what we hold on to and what we let go of, and how we change and adapt to meet new circumstances and new challenges. 4 of our panelists lead important historic Black institutions, several of which were created during the 1960s, during a significant upsurge in the Black freedom movement to address absences, erasures, and distortions of Black people's history, character, and potential. And 2 of our panelists lead newer grassroots Black youth-led organizations that were created to address the issues and struggles of their generation. So I'd like to begin, instead of starting with the past, I'd like to start with the current day. And I'd like to ask the younger people on the panel to tell us what their assessment is of our historically iconic and important Black institutions. So I just want to ask frank questions about what do you know about WVON, the DuSable Museum? What role does the Black church play in the current movement that you all are leaders of? What do you know about Johnson Publication, and how do you see these institutions impacting your lives as young Black people, but also your activism as young Black people?
Well, that was a lot. I have to start somewhere. So I'll start off with the DuSable Museum and the importance that it plays to not only the Black community, but the greater Chicago community and the youth community especially. There's a Tracye symbol, the Sankofa bird. It's that you can't move forward without learning from your history and consensus. And the DuSable Museum serves that purpose. It's right here in the heart of the community, the Southside community, and a Black community especially. It's right there close to Metropolitan Hyde Park area as well, but yet still, you can learn so much from here, from the exhibits that's here, and the importance of Harold Washington allotting this land, this area for this museum, the first Black mayor of Chicago. It shows that it was here for a purpose, and it's here to serve a great purpose. And it just extends out to WVON as well. Well, WVON being one of the last, well, the last Black-owned brand that started and based radio station in Chicago. It reflects the history of Chicago, with us once having enumerated gas stations and stores in Chicago, and when it dwindled down to either one or none, and WVON stands and it symbolizes that struggle, that ongoing struggle of self-determination. I would have to say that the youth are the vanguards of the movement. The youth have always been the most populous part of the movement, but without the wisdom of the elders and the guidance and direction of the elders in this movement for liberation and self-determination, which was well demonstrated with the establishment of WVON and the DuSable Museum, the legacy can move on and more people can be empowered.
So that was a lot in that question, Tracye. That's really good questions. I was just talking with Dr. Ivor Carruthers, which I'm not sure if we're actually related. We'll ask me at least once a day. So I'm related to the Carruthers here in Chicago, Jacob Carruthers and all those folks. And we were talking about the Black church, or the institution, faith-based institutions and their relationship to what's happening in this particular moment. And I said, well, there are different beliefs. People feel different ways, just within my organization and other folks I'm in relationship with across the movement work. And what I believe is that, particularly when we're talking about the Black church, I don't believe that faith-based institutions in the Black community are completely divorced from this particular moment. I think those that are most visible are some of the most problematic. I think that is what's actually happening. And so you see some of the mega church pastors, and not so much even pastors and leaders from churches that aren't mega churches, will come out on particular issues, particularly when you see a young Black man killed, when it's on the issue of Black LGBTQ rights and justice, or what happens to women in this country, particularly Black women and girls in this country, they're not so forthcoming. And so I think, and this might get me in trouble, but I was thinking it might get me in trouble. I just got back from Baltimore. It was planned months in advance when I ended up being there, particularly the day after the first, you saw the images of the young Black man taking a garbage can to a police car. And so I was there, and there are many faith-based leaders who've become prominent over the years and stood at the forefront of what's happening in Baltimore, but they are very silent, and when they're not silent, they're very violent towards Black people who live at the margins. So talking about Black queer people, talking about Black trans folks, talking about Black women, period. And so I think that there are more radical Black churches that exist. But unfortunately, some of the most visible ones, some of the most visible leaders are the ones who actually are trying to stay 40, 50, 60 years back in time, and they need to catch up. So that's how I think about the Black church. I think it's still important in this particular moment, but those who are most visible, many of them need to step back. And then I think about the role of some other Black institutions in this particular moment. I think that many of them serve as a blueprint for what is possible, particularly in moments where the climate was not very accepting or welcoming to Black people, and it never has been in this country, right? But folks who have stepped out front, and Corey referred to young people as being the vanguard, these institutions also represent people and communities who have served as vanguards at different points in time. On the same note, I think that there is a lot of room for growth and change. And that's why you have folks, I've witnessed the transformation of Ebony magazine in the past 5 years, personally, and I think it was something that was necessary, that needs to happen, and that those kinds of things need to happen continuously, because we get stuck in not just the past, because not everything about the past is wrong or bad, but if we get stuck in ways that aren't firmly cemented in our liberation as a people, and like all Black people, not just respectful Black people with college degrees, Black people who can speak on these panels, Black folk who have a certain pedigree, then those are the kinds of institutions that need to go. Those kinds of practices need to go, and we need to make room for institutions that are really focused on the liberation of all of us.
Thank you, and I think both Charlene and Corey are pointing out the need for a true kind of intergenerational movement and activity in a way that doesn't privilege either side of the equation, like the youth voice or the adult voice. They all have a role to play. And so now I want to turn to people who are heads of institutions or representing in Black institutions and ask them to respond to some of what Charlene and Corey have laid out, but in particular to talk about what are some of the challenges you face as historic and still important institutions. What challenges do you face today in terms of your relationship to a younger audience or a younger market? What your relationship to the current political movement that's being led by young people? And how do you navigate this new terrain while holding on to all of the years and years of learning that you've had as leaders of these institutions? How do you move forward in this period?
Yeah, if I can just jump in. I wanted to respond very involved question think Sister Carruthers, with respect to her observations about the black church, has identified some things that black church leaders internally are having conversations about, which is them moving away from some of its more liberationist theology and social action. I think I would say that with respect to Baltimore, which is right now example of unrest in the country, and Reverend Jamal Bryant was very active, AME pastor in Baltimore, both on the side of promoting justice, as well as challenging some of the more unproductive energy that was taking place in the Baltimore situation. But I think she is correct when she talks about the black church's role in social progress. I would argue that one of the institutions that we still own is the black church. More money passes through black churches on Sunday morning than I would think arguably any other business apparatus. More people, African Americans, gather on a Sunday morning around a particular set of values and agenda. And so I think part of what the challenges of young pastors like myself and others is for us to reclaim that liberationist approach. And that's why I illustrate with respect to Baltimore in the person of Reverend Jamal Bryant, who's been very much at the forefront of both pushing for social justice in terms of what happened in Baltimore, but also really challenging the broad African American community to a collective efficacy. And so I think you're right in terms of us really trying to regain that liberationist approach. There's a wonderful book that's written by Reggie Williams, and he's talking about, it's entitled Bonhoeffer, the Black Jesus, and in that book, he talks about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was killed as a pastor in Germany in his efforts to challenge Nazi Germany. We argue that his liberationist theology was born not by German theology, but by the days he spent in Abyssinia Baptist Church under Adam Clayton Powell. And so Reggie in that book does a wonderful job getting at Sister Carruthers of how the black church has moved away from some of its mission, but some opportunity for us to really reclaim that liberationist approach.
I'm happy to go next, and let me commend the dynamic people who are part of this panel. I just want to kind of comment on something that Vance spoke on, and that is the importance of our church. I think one of the things that is not acknowledged, because we don't control the narrative, is we concentrate so much on the black church. And I love the Lord and I go to church, but unfortunately today, the majority of African Americans are not in church. If they were, we wouldn't see the carnage on the streets that we were seeing and things of that sort. That doesn't mean they don't have a relationship with the Lord. And I think so often you look at somebody dynamic like Pastor Jamal in Baltimore, and what my dear sister is saying is that he is a great leader, but he's not the only leader. So when the news media goes out, the first thing they do is they try to find a reverend. And that's a very narrow view of African Americans today. It's a great view, but you see in the streets these young people where there is a void for leadership, and they can really captivate their community. Her story is going to be different from Pastor Jamal's. Her conversation on how to solve this problem is going to be different. But yet we allow the narrative to be told and be set forth by individuals who it's really not connected to our community. And that's when institutions like the DuSable, like a VON locally, but even larger, and a Johnson Publishing Company, becomes very important. Because if we don't preserve our authentic voice, we're not able to tell our own story. The story that you hear about Baltimore, these shootings on a VON, is quite different than the story you're going to hear on CNN. It's a very valid story. It's a first-person story. And that's what makes it so important to the conversation, because it is first person. You get these reporters that go on the street a lot of times on these places, and that's what they're accustomed to going to. I think the narrative might have changed in a very huge way if you look at the rise of someone like Barack Obama, who did not come out of the church, who went on to become president of the United States. So we don't need to start a war with our church. We are big enough, smart enough people to understand that we can pat our heads and rub our bellies at the same time. There is a place for our church, but there is a great mind trust when you think about these young people who are able to talk about who we are right now. I deal with that at VON. We celebrated our 50th anniversary 2 years ago. That's unbelievable. But one of the things that I talked to about my staff right after it was, what does VON look like for the next 50 years? Because if we're the same VON we were in the 60s and 70s, we can't exist. And what do you do to make those small changes where you don't alienate the people that built VON, but that you provide some inclusions for the young dynamic people that we see here in the audience? And I think that's what we have to do. But interestingly enough, this becomes a great conversation for this room. The room isn't big enough. We should be in a big auditorium having this conversation. We have lost so much of what is authentically ours. And that's when it becomes important that we broaden the umbrella of people who are speaking so that we don't get so narrowly focused that it's only, allowed for the church to have the voice. All of us can speak. I give you a perfect example and then I'll stop. I'm fascinated by the success of this movie, Empire. I love Empire. When Empire became #1, the first thing they did was compared it to Scandal. They compared it to Scandal. They didn't compare it to CSI. Or they didn't compare it to whatever the #1 show is that's in this category. So it becomes, see, we can only have one hit. We can't have multiple hits. And a lot of that work has to be done from us. We've got to change the narrative and the focus. I don't think that the broader community means any harm by it. They don't know. We know. It's not enough of us saying, telling our story and telling the truth. And so that's enough for me.
I'm going to ask Ms. Rogers if you go next, because I want to pick up on what Charlene was saying about the major transformation, very public transformation that we saw Ebony undergo once you became a leader in that institution. And even more recently, I think with the April issue, Charlene and several other young black leaders from around the country have been featured, and it's addressing that tendency to only focus on the older black male religious leaders by presenting a wide variety of young people who are out there doing their thing today. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of behind the scenes thinking that went into the transformation that we were able to witness in the public?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here and talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing and some of the observations that I have traveling across this great country. So first of all, I think the one thing that if you see our magazine, and I actually brought the race issue, always gotta bring a little advertising. This is December, but if you look on the spine, it says it's more than a magazine, it's a movement. And we took a step back and we said, what is Johnson Publishing? What do we represent? Who do we represent? We've been in the business for 70 years. What do we really do well? Because sometimes you lose your way. You're over here, you're over there. People tell you how great you can do this or that. And so you start doing this or that, and you forget about that core, objective, the core vision that Mr. Johnson had. And then we started to reflect and we said, you know what? Why are we going to try to out-brilliance him? Let's get back to what we were good at. And the one thing that he was good at was this whole idea of being a conduit to our people. being able to tell the stories in an authentic voice, not being afraid if the pictures weren't beautiful, not being afraid if we, in our own communities, had different opinions. Let's put those side by side. Let's begin to start a dialogue of what is authentic to what we call the African American. And so we have gone back and said, you know, I insist that all of the new people coming into the business go into the archives. I'll tell you a story. A number of the people that are writing for us are in their 20s. Some are older. And so I said, you guys have to learn from each other. It's not war. It's not one is wrong and one is right. It's different points of views that evolve over time. So I had a brilliant young editor who was going on television to talk about the new civil rights movement, her civil rights movement. She said to me, you know nothing about millennials, Desiree. I said, well, I have one, so I know a little. I wasn't saying nothing. I said, but okay, what are you saying to me? Because I want her to be able to express herself, and I want to make certain that I am helping her as she thinks about how she wants to position her opinion on national television. So it's not about telling her she's wrong or right, but it's about, can we think a little bit before we go on to make certain that your opinions are as baked and as solid as you really want them to be, so you don't lose people in the process in regards to what your viewpoint is before you even get started because you've made a crucial error. So here's a discussion. I want to talk about how incredible it is that, you know, people today, the civil rights movement of millennials, we wear whatever we want. We got cutoffs, jeans, hair wraps, blah, blah, blah. When I look at the pictures, you know, of the 60s, everyone's all dressed up. They're just bowing down to the black man. Look at them. They're all trying to look white. I said, no. I said, you have to understand, at that point in time, to be able to afford a suit and a tie, a dress and a skirt, and to look like your white counterparts, that was what was in your face. You're not going to look down at me because I'm in some shattered, you know, or tattered clothing. I said, it's the exact opposite. That was their version of what you think you're doing today. So let's not always think you're the first to think of something. Maybe it's just shown in a different way. And so I think what we are trying to do is meet people where they are. If you want to see us on the internet, go on ebony.com, that's fine. If you want to, you know, buy the print magazine, we'd love you to do that. If you want to see it on an iPad, we have to be where the people are, but we've got to keep the stories fresh. We've got to keep the stories real. We can't, you know, we got to usually, this is very unusual not to have a celebrity on the cover, because the other thing Mr. Johnson always says, you got to give them some sugar to preach to them about what's really in between the book. They got to see something to attract their attention to buy the book, usually about a celebrity or something more scandalous or something like that. Then you can teach in the middle of the pages. And so I think we have an incredible opportunity. I'm going around the country visiting with institutions, mainly, that are advertisers, because I want to see these publications continue to exist. So obviously I need everyone to have subscriptions, but I also need advertisers. And so one of the things that I'm noticing is that there's this movement, and Melody can talk about this movement away from black media to general media only. And so I'm going in and I'm nicely, in my little suit, asking, you know, how can we be a partner, you know, with you? Why aren't you advertising in my magazine? And I always pick someone that's already doing print advertising or digital advertising, so that can't be the first excuse. Okay, because that'll be the first excuse. We don't do print advertising. So, but look at these pictures I have of your advertising. Why don't we have any of those? You know, and sometimes I'll be able to tear some out that even have black models and actors in them. And I still don't have those. I'm just wondering, who do I need to talk to see how we can get some of these advertisements. And one particular company who's tried to do a lot on race in this country, some of their initiatives have worked, some of the more recent initiatives have not worked. And so they were, you know, I got forced in there. I pushed my way into their offices. Someone got me the meeting. So they were all hands folded when I came in. I listened. I told them about this issue. I told them about our videos. I recited all the statistics around race, economic empowerment, education, you know, how poorly still today we're doing. If you look at the numbers are not good for our folks. And so I said, you know, we can help you with this dialogue. We can help you give that good housekeeping stamp of approval with the Ebony name on it. But you got to listen to us and listen to our approach. And I said to them, I brought the issue where we highlighted many of the young leaders. I said, why don't we get these young leaders together? And why don't they help you and help us to construct a dialogue and a conversation with multi-generational or young people about this issue? You can't do it, you know, alone. We'll see what happens, to be, you know, to be continued. But I think we have to stick together as a Black people and stop dividing ourselves up, because that's kind of what people want. If we're all divided, then we can't move forward. If we all stick together and take some similar themes and really focus on those similar things, then you have a movement. Then you have some corrections, some changes. I often say, you know, we just need one Rosa Parks Day. One Rosa Parks Day where we just boycott all of those businesses or institutions that aren't investing in our community. You know, but we don't want to do that because we want the this and the that and the that and the this. You know, one day, I guarantee you, you know, we would see some change. And part of the issue is, in my view, the two issues: education and dollars. If people were rich, nobody be fighting like this. Right. We'd all be fine doing whatever. We need money and we need education. We need education, we need money. If those two things are corrected, I think this whole paradigm changes.
And I know there's not an anti-church sentiment, but I just wanted to be a little clearer in the significance of the church. There are about, and don't hold me to this, but the Food Depository that does some data and some research around homelessness and food deserts has identified there are about 800,000 people in the greater Chicago area who are hungry. The vast majority of the outreaches of the Food Depository to the community to address that is through the Black church. When we think about Barack Obama, and I know this because I was at the meeting, Carol, when what was then a young state senator decided that he had this vision to head toward the White House, his efforts to launch that effort was through meetings with African American clergy here in Chicago, who through their national networks reached out to other clergy who said, we got a young, brilliant man here in Chicago, y'all need to meet him. And so I'm just lifting up the importance that as we think about the new civil rights movement and what our work is forward, that consistent to what some of the panelists have said, that we honor institutions and tweak them a little bit. Because the church, we would be hard pressed to launch any effort to organize Black folk if we did not be strategic to do that through the institution of the church.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I didn't hear an anti-church sentiment.
I'm a preacher too.
I think what I heard was a call, and you made it yourself, for a more turn back to liberation theology, but also Charlene was asking for us to be more inclusive and think about how all of our Black institutions, including the church, are inclusive of all Black people, not just Black men, not just straight Black people, not just, you know, born female Black people, Black women. So just a call for us to be mindful and learn from the young people who are teaching us about how to be more responsive to all segments of the community and not exclude anyone. I want to jump back again to this question about our cultural heritage and the material culture that the DuSable Museum is charged with preserving, collecting, and making accessible to the community, but also, you know, Ebony Magazine and their important photographic archive, and I just have to ask about it because I'm a historian, and I just want to talk a little bit about what are the responsibilities of these institutions like an Ebony Johnson Publications or the DuSable Museum to preserve the heritage, the material evidence of our history, and to make it accessible to the community. And what does it mean when they're under threat? What does it mean if the DuSable Museum doesn't have enough funds to properly care for and catalog its artifacts and make them accessible to researchers or to students who want to do a paper? What would it mean if the Johnson Photo Archive was sold to a private entity that then somehow cut off our ability to access it or made us have to pay to access it? So how do we deal with kind of raising the money to keep our stuff safe and preserve it for future generations, but also, you know, walk that fine line between, you know, understanding that Johnson Publication is a business that has to survive, but they also are the holder of our legacy and call Ebony Magazine the curator of the Black experience.
Well, a couple of things back to what Desiree says, and that is a lack of money. I mean, you know, this place here is a lot of money a month to run. People don't realize that VON costs a lot of money to run, and I'm afraid to even ask what it costs to run Ebony Magazine. But I'm on the board, and so is Desiree, on the board of the Museum of Science and Industry. I wish you would look at the money at the Museum of Science and Industry and look at the money at the DuSable Museum. And therein lies the problem. It's not only donors from the outside, but it's us too.
That's right.
It's us too. I am right now attempting to put a team together to save Els Franciscan High School. It is a shame that that school has 100 students, a school that was designed to educate Black young men who are Catholic, sitting in the heart of the community. Almost everything that is legacy in this great city of Chicago, that is Black legacy, is in jeopardy. And we can think of a lot of reasons why, but a lot of it is us in this room. We don't find value, not just us, because I know that the majority of us might do, but if we as a people don't get back to finding our community's resources and institutions important, we find value in a lot of things. We don't find that at home. It's a problem. It's a problem.
So it's always tough for me when we start to have conversations about what's wrong in the Black community and what's wrong with our institutions, and we don't point very clear connections to the structural issues that are impacting these things. And that's really hard for me. Like, yes, I believe that it is important for us to invest in our institutions. Absolutely, we should. If no one else does, we should. At the same time, we've looked at a devastation of Black wealth in this country due to the foreclosure crisis. We can't have a conversation absence of poverty in Black communities and what it once meant even, you know, 30, 40 years ago to be middle class and to be Black. That is not the reality for so many Black people today. It's just not. And so, Chicago's the perfect place to talk about these things. It's the perfect place to talk about how does housing impact wealth, and how do we even talk about poverty? Because we have the reality of banks giving bad loans to Black people who were eligible for good loans, and who were actually eligible for good loans, and that contributing to a major foreclosure crisis. And that's just one thing. We see continued divestment from the Black community, not just through our institutions such as DuSable or other the Johnson Publishing Company or other institutions. We've seen a massive divestment from governments and other private corporations in Black communities. Massive. And so when you have in our community 51 schools, public schools being closed, that is real. That is a divestment. We want to lay that in the hands of everyday Black people. That's completely unjust for us to do that, and it's not fair. I think it's easier for us to talk about what we do wrong and what we've done, what we have not done, and while at the same time talking about real forces. Because money is not just currency. It's not just like dollars. Money and the budget of the city, the budgets of corporations, the budgets of individuals are reflective of priorities. That's what it is. I was reading someone's Facebook status. He's quoted, he's an activist in Baltimore. He was talking about how budgets, I'm sure he's not the originator of this, budgets are basically a moral document. they're reflective of what people prioritize and what they believe in, right? And so we have to ask ourselves at the same time, while we're asking why people aren't, I'm a member of the DuSable Museum. My parents, it's just values that we're instilled, just thinking about how, and not just my parents, but I went to Beasley Academic Center, so we was like Black History every day, year round. And so there's this investment instilled in Blackness and Black people and Black community. That's one part of it, and it's an important part of it. But we as a people, if we don't know anything else, we know that there are forces even outside of us that have always had a major impact on our ability to live with dignity and even able to like move money. Because I think what we're talking about is also an issue of power and lack thereof, or where power lives. And we have to organize money. Like organizing people, organizing money, that's the crux of power. And so I love to think about people like Shirley Chisholm. When she raised money for her campaign, she went to the projects. She went to mothers who were living on welfare and public assistance because she too believed that they can invest. What does your community outreach strategy look like? What does that look like? What are you doing? Because I don't think any Black museum can operate in the same way that any white museum does. We can't operate like the Museum of Science and Industry.
Exactly.
We can't. And so I can't say for sure like what it looks like. This isn't a critique on the museum or any institution, but I think that we have to interrogate how we do things differently and how we engage our community, knowing what we know about our community and knowing the forces that they're not as white folks. So let's be clear, Chicago has a plethora of middle people that are Black who are complicit in many, many things that go wrong in this city. So I think we have to interrogate a lot deeper, and yes, Black people should be given to DuSable Museum. We should, absolutely. At the same time, Black people are not the sole reason why the DuSable Museum doesn't have the investments that it needs to have.
Corey, you were trying to get into
Yes.
I'm spreading this where I'm going out and doing what I can to bring the money in, because we need the money. It is complicated. There's a lot of things going on. I have a Microsoft relationship, and we do advertising online with Microsoft and talk to them about bringing more dollars in. These are our corporate partners. And so I want to share with you and just say here that I'm like Harold Lucas in a way of standing along with this. We all need help. It's about unity. Our philosophy should be coming together where we can. And
Thank you. Did you have a question? Oh, you're done.
Yes,
okay.
my question is, thank you all for being here. Please continue to do it.
All right. Can we get the sister all the way in the back?
Of course.
Hi. So I think a major part of this conversation is really about extinction, right? And so we're talking about the extinction of these institutions and these programs and so forth and so on. And I'm looking around this room right now, and I think there's a big gap because the majority of people in this room are over the age of 40. And so we're not, for me, as a 28-year-old, speaking of my own experience, I fought so hard to try to talk to people in my generation above me. And I was shut down by women primarily a lot. Men reached back to me sometimes, but it wasn't as intentional as I tried to be with the generation below me. And so I think I want to ask questions like, how are we bridging the gap? Because looking at this panel right now, only 2 people on this panel that are under 35. And a lot of these institutions that we're trying to maintain, Charlene brought up, we're maintaining with the same thought pattern that our parents had. Like, it was important for my parents to vote because they didn't have the right to vote. But now in my generation, is that important to me? How, without trying to repeat what was important to you, how are we bridging the gap to make sure that, like, us, the ones who are going to maintain this? Because unfortunately, like, you get older, you become extinct. How do you make sure that we hold on to it? Because I don't feel like I can come into the DuSable and have ownership in it. But I remember like meeting Dr. Burroughs, and she was like, I was 19 walking up and down the street on Michigan Avenue collecting coins for Southside Community Arts Center. And her welcoming me into her home. So how do you make sure that, like, I can walk into WBO and go, hey, y'all got this idea for a show. How are you bridging the gap to make sure that my generation is included and the generation below me is?
So a thought. We kind of spoke to it, and I sent Dr. Adams' hand, but I think it's about an engagement strategy and a plan, right? So it should be the case that every Chicago public school has a field trip here. I know when I was 8 years old and I said that to somebody here, it was mandatory that we came on a regular basis to the DuSable. I think every black church in the city, every church should do a field trip of the young people to this, because there's a distance between what you own and what you know. And if you don't know, you won't own it. And so I think some of what we have to do is back to what I was talking about, which is related to the political dynamic, and that is education. You know, it was mandatory that I understood the significance of Dr. Barrows and the DuSable Museum, and so I'm able to own that. So part of, as we talk about a plan, Marshall Plan, and a strategy coming out of this, the next step could be, Desiree, if you and Mel, you could help me with this, is to have a conversation with the Chicago Public Schools about being very deliberate and intentional about, if it's nothing more than a pilot, getting us, of the 20 networks in the city, a group of networks that come to the DuSable Museum. That could be a next step. That could be a tangible next step that we can measure if that happened or if it didn't happen.
So I'll let them respond to that, but I think the question was about those young people who are already educated and active in their communities and with their peers, feeling like they have a voice in these institutions and kind of sharing power with between the generations. So if somebody could talk to that.
Can I ask her a question though, to be able to talk to it? Where do you feel that? Tell me what institution or where is that greatly expressed?
The Southside Community Arts Center. I mean, I spent 4 years. I remember the first day I walked in, the ED said to me, "Take your shoes off, welcome home." And for me, as a transient to this city, as a transplant, I felt for the first time that I had somewhere that I could be like myself. And honestly, as a person of color in this day and age, my fear of extinction is like that I'm gonna be shot and killed. And like, not that this institution is going to survive, but like, how do I find a safe place just to feel safe in my black body in this city? And that's what the Southside Community Arts Center did for me. They were like, take your shoes off. You safe here. You welcome here. We welcome your voice. And so that's really what I'm asking.
So is the next step how we connect that institution to this institution? So
no. How do we make clear, for me, it's safe for my generation to have somewhere to go, first of all, to talk it out, to think it out, to make our plan, but we have a buy-in to it. And I think it's so hard to have a buy-in to it when you're often just trying to figure out how you're going to eat, how you're going to eat every day, how you're going to get to school safely every day. If my basic fundamentals of my life are not set, how can I be asked to have a buy-in to something that I feel might not have a buy-in to me personally?
Wonder if any of these our institutions do any of you all have or have ever had any kind of youth board or youth advisory committee that has access to the people running the institution that, you know, can come up with programming ideas, who can help set the agenda? And is there a way to, if we don't have those, to build those?
Absolutely, at my place, absolutely.
You have a youth advisory board?
Well, what I do is I have a program by which any young person that comes to VOA and goes to work, they sit and they help develop the content of what we're putting up. We meet every Thursday in production. They come and sit with the producers, with me, to decide so that we're making sure that we're hearing their voices and that they are counted. I'm sure, I don't know if the DuSable has it or not, and I'm sure Ebony has something that's laid out that way. I don't think the institutions that are represented up here are void of that at all.
I think we're getting off the track though, guys. So now all of a sudden we're talking about programs at institutions.
Right. Ask the question about what do we do?
Yeah, I think, you know, and what I heard there, we're not going to camp, just hold on. What I heard is her talking about things that seem to be more fundamental issues in regards to eating, school, danger, safety, all of these types of things. I mean, those are kind of some of the, if you look at the statistics across the board, and we, you know, looked at 68 to today, we're not moving forward. That's the point. A very small group of us is moving forward. And I go back to where I started. Education and money. Education and money. And so I'm interested in developing coalitions. I don't care if you're 12, 80, 90, rich, poor. How do we get coalitions together to drive the change for our people in these major cities? Not just one area. I mean, and if we don't all pull together, all the organizations, everyone coming together, not I'm working over here, this one's working over there. We need mass. And we need mass, and we need all of us standing together saying, these are our 3 top things. How can we work to get those pulled together? Otherwise, forget about it. Everybody, we're so fragmented. We're all over the place. You know, we need short memories, you know, off to the next thing. It's not going to work. We're lost. When I hear young people saying they don't understand why it's important for them to vote, that kills me. Not because I'm ancient and because I fought for the right to vote. I didn't. My parents did. I didn't. But the bottom line, you should be putting candidates up. You got a leader that you want to stand, you should be putting them up. Grassroots, talking voter projects, however, getting the money together and voting for them. That's the point. That's how you get change made. If you sit down and say, well, I don't have any say in this, it's all, you know, complicated, or it's all, you know, beyond me, only one vote doesn't make a difference. Locally, especially, locally, you can make a tremendous change, quick and easy, if you pull together.
It always comes rumbling down to, well, what are we going to get done? The question is not, what are we going to get done? What are you going to do? Now, let me just tell you something. Talk about young people, right? I'm 78 years old on my birthday, and I live 50 miles from here. I drive to this place every single day. 50 miles each way, and I pay my own gas. Now, if you want to do something, get up and do something. If I promise you, if there is some project you want to be involved with, nobody will stop you. Now, am I saying it's easy? You bet it's not easy. It's hard, real hard. Because you think you're going to save black folks in the next 30 minutes? Right? Well, this has been going on for 400 years. But what you can say is, I, your name, am going to do the following thing starting tomorrow morning. And I'm going to show up. And if you say, well, can you pay my way? No, I can't. Figure out how to get there. That is the story of struggle. I sat on drugstore counters when I was 17 years old. Right? Nobody paid me to do it. Nobody said it. We did it. They called us nigga every way you can count. Right? So what was the question? Are you going back tomorrow? Yes, we are. And when we kept going back, all of a sudden it went away after about 10 years worth of effort, right? So you guys, this stuff's not easy, and ain't nobody going to do it for you. And it doesn't matter whether you're 21, 78, or 36, you're going to have the same problem. What are you going to do tomorrow morning to make this thing better? And we can't blame it on everybody else.
You know, I actually absolutely agree with that in a lot of different ways. I feel like me, myself, is very much so invested in this conversation because not only do I live in this community and I've worked in this community, I own a business in this community, and I went to school in this community. And I would say myself, as far as voting goes, and I know this is a whole different, I feel like this is a lot of topics that we're trying to tackle at one time. But one thing I will say is, I feel like we spend a lot of time, I mean a lot of time. I mean honestly, about an hour and a half of this panel, we spent discussing and categorizing the issues and where what's this problem with this person, the problem with this institution, the problem with this. And I understand, and I feel like everybody in this panel who came here, maybe I could be wrong about this, but we understood the issues in the community when we came into this panel. And I feel like sometimes what ends up happening is we spend the entire panel sharing that same knowledge that we all kind of all share. We live it. Everybody in here has lived what you guys are speaking about. Every one of us probably have had issues with the church, or in some ways, great things to say about the church or negative things to say about the church. But I guess just to wrap it up, I would say that my biggest problem is we have moved away from ideas. And when I say that, this gentleman here spoke a couple of times about ideas, but he had the least amount of time to speak. And this lady right here spoke a lot about ideas. Not to say that people up here don't have ideas, because y'all seem like some really influential and important people, but I guess my question is, we can sit here all day and talk about what everybody else can do better. But when are we going to take the time to start investing our energy in the ideas, in the creation of ideas, in the upholding of those ideas? Because anybody can sit here and say, oh, DuPage needs to do better, or DuSable needs to do better, or needs to do something else. But until you tell me how I can do that, or you can sit there and we can sit here and have a debate about how we can do it, not just about what needs to be done. How do we take this community for what we have and using the ideas that we know we have? We have young people in the community right now working. Like I say, honestly, I heard a lot of people talking about how young black people need to vote and young black youth need to vote. But I would say that most people that talk to me about voting has been young people. I don't get in conversations with older people about politics. Most of the time, they don't listen to what I have to say. So I would say that there is a disconnect, speaking to what this person said, there's a disconnect between our generation and the older generation, and we need to focus more so on the ideas that will bring us together and less on why we aren't together. And that's
Thank you.
Jomo, can we take all of the remaining questions at once and then have the panelists do one more final go around?
Let me get this gentleman right here.
Thank you. I'm Mark Wallace, one of the hosts at WVON, also the executive director of the Citizens to Abolish Red by Camera. But I'm also a small business real estate developer in the city of Chicago, mainly on the south side of Chicago. And I'm a transplant here from Miami, Florida, and came to the city of Chicago and saw this metropolis of black folks here. And I am appalled that we have 60 African-American people who sit in legislative positions from the county all the way to the federal government here in Illinois. And we have these institutions, and we have this political structure that is fractionized and continue to divest in the black community. And we sit around talking about somebody buying a subscription to DuSable, or a membership to DuSable, or a subscription to Ebony Jet. You can't buy a subscription to any of those or a membership to any of those if you don't have money to do so. If you don't have a job, if you can't feed yourself, you can't pay your mortgage, you can't buy a membership to DuSable or a subscription to. So the point that I'm making is that we have people in political positions. What did we vote? And why did we elect?
Contrary to what's been said by some of the people in the audience, I do think there are a couple concrete things on the table in terms of action plans. This is one conversation among many. I don't think we talk about these things too much. We need to talk. We don't all agree. There's the analysis has to keep evolving. So I don't think it's a waste of time to sit here and have these conversations. I really disagree with that. So, and people who have concrete ideas, let's talk to the people after the panel and get something going. It's all not going to happen in this 2 hours. So I'm going to give the panelists a chance to respond to whatever they want to respond to, and then we're going to be done with this part of the program, but the conversation goes on.
Really quick, you spoke to my comment, and I never said any disrespect to what was discussed.
I wasn't speaking to you directly. I was talking to everyone. So I want to let a couple people on the panel who want to make closing remarks, and then we're going to be done for this part.
So my closing remarks is to try to speak to the intergenerational and the comprehensive holistic approach. And it's a point of history, particularly as this is the year that we celebrate the significance of the Voting Rights Act. In December 1955, the Montgomery Improvement Association was having a similar conversation like this. But they were dealing with the issue of sitting in the back of the bus. Dr. King wasn't even on the panel. He was sitting in the back. He was a new pastor in the town. An informed group of people just like this were talking about the issue, right? It was an issue then, but we talked about issues. He was called forward to lead it, not because he had guided the discussion, but the people came up with a plan and said, you can say that better than we can. I'm saying that to say this. You have two major institutions here. The two major institutions here, an institution here. If a meeting was convened where we could have this conversation again, to somebody's observation about a focused conversation, I think we could come up with some 3 or 4 actionable items, right, that could guide an action plan, Marshall Plan, or whatever you want to call it, right? I'm here representing the city. I'll make sure that we bring to bear whatever that resource is, so it's focused and guided. So if we could just do that.
Offer. Okay. Thank you. And I think we're going to end on that note. And I don't know if Ms. Taylor wanted to come back up and say a few closing words for us. Okay, so thank her for convening us all today. I hope all of you will get a chance to see the play at the Goodman Theater. I think it's open now.
June 1st. June 1st.
Opens June 1st.
June 1st.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you to the panel.
Huh? Yeah, yeah. We preview.